I would like to read to you something that would tell you why the evolutionists' methods that they use for dating would be wrong. Like the technology built to date, rocks and things like that would be wrong. And this is out of the book Traced by that author. And this is a very interesting sentence. And let me read it to you. So right now he's I got to chapter 6 where he um is talking about them doing testings to figure out how long um a certain type of people have lived here on this earth, or and the tests results, obviously, he explains that they're coming out to, you know 200,000. And then you get to a sentence that explains why those test results came to 200,000 instead of, you know, the biblical account that we see, from the Bible. And I'm going to read you that sentence. They forced the results from the high quality methods to fit the results from the lower quality methods. Why? Question mark. Because the later, meaning the later Earth, fit their expectations. Expectations. Did you catch that? Fit their expectations. Okay, so evolutionists, they um, have often created they've often created, technology, right? You How many um, computers and different things that the evolutionists have created to give them data, right? And well, if you have expectations that this world is very old, in fact, billions of years, or if you have expectations that say this rock or that rock or whatever is millions of years, well, wouldn't you create a computer or some type of technology that will give you that type of data, that will give you data telling you exactly what you expected, right? Well, do you kind of get a sense that you can't do that? You can't You cannot, the data cannot match what you've expected. Or let me rephrase that. You cannot make the data match what you expect. So if you're somebody that expects the world to be very old, you cannot um you cannot, like, make data up that's, tells you what you expect. You just cannot do that. That's right there. That kind of tells you that they're, you know, evolutionists have an expectation of how old the earth is. Therefore, their data is going to tell them what they already figure. Well, that should tell you right there that they're, playing around with fire, that they're trying to carry a narrative, right? That they're simply, they don't really care about the truth. They just want society to carry the same belief. Um, they don't really care that their data would be wrong. They just want their data to match what they expect. And you cannot do that. Do you understand? I'm trying to put enough emphasis on this that you just cannot do that. That's not true science. That's not true data. You cannot force the data to say what you've already expected. Now, you can expect that the world is billions of years, but if the data says otherwise, well, you then must follow what the data says. But you can't have those expectations um, create some kind of machine that tests data that's going to line up with your expectations. That's false science. That is false science. I'm going to say it. It sounds like evolution is just like the fake news. You heard Donald Trump say, talk about fake news. Well, I'm talking about fake science, and I'm here to tell you that everything that an evolutionist does is fake science. It's not true science. It's not, you know, true science does not go out searching for data that's going to line up with what they believe. No, you start out, I mean, that's where you start. You do start with, okay, young Earth versus old Earth, but then whenever the data comes in, the data tells you, you know, which one it is. But to say the earth is old And if the data tells us something different, we're just going to throw it out the window. Like, wait a minute. Again, that's not true science. It simply is not true science. So, how do we know that the world is between 5 to 7,000 years? How do creationists know that? Well, creationists will look at not just biblical records, but they look at records, throughout, different people groups. It's interesting how every society that, like every nation, every tribe has a historical record of the flood that the book of Genesis talks about. You look at historical records. Historical records is going to tell you the history of this world. Historical records are going to tell you how old this world is. So you look at historical records. That's part of the difference between a evolutionist and our worldview and biblical view. See, people that stick to biblical view, the difference is that they know that they are looking at a historical record. Therefore, we know that our data is a lot more accurate. It's a lot more accurate to say that our world is between 5,000 to 7,000 years of age based on the historical record. But, okay, what if there was no historical record? How can data with no historical record tell us how old the earth is? Simple. You don't have to create a computer that gives you test results. It's very, very simple. You take the Father and the Son, and you take how many years apart from. So I'm 32 years of age. That means I'm 32 years younger than my father. So, let's just go to the Bible real quick. Let's actually go to Genesis to help you understand what it is that I'm saying. So, to help you understand, go to me into Genesis chapter 5, verse 3. It says, when Adam was 130 years, he became the father of a son who was just like him, in his very image. In his very image. He named his son Seth. So, 130 years, when Adam was 130 years of age, he had Seth. So, go back to what I said earlier. What I said earlier was, wrong. I kind of had that backwards. But Seth's father, Adam, was 130 years before, like 130 years old when, Seth was born. So that means I had it upside down. I kind of had it backwards. But what you do here is you take the father's age of when the child was born. So Adam was 130 years when Seth was born, when obviously Eve gave birth to Seth. And that's how, so they would be 130 years apart. So you take that 130 years, you write it down on a piece of paper, because that's how many years gone by before Seth was birthed into this world. So then you can you go down to 6. It says, when Seth was 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. So again, you're taking Seth's age of 105 years. That's 105 years apart from father and son. So you write that 105 years down on paper. And you repeat the process until you get to Noah. You repeat the process. See, you're taking how many years apart the son and the firstborn. The firstborn son is from the father. You take how many years the firstborn is from the father and write it down on paper and repeat. Then when you get to Noah, it tells you how many years Noah was when the flood came. And you can take those numbers, the numbers of years apart, you add all of them up, and that's your answer to how many years from Adam and Eve to the flood, how many years there were. That is going to tell you how many years from Adam and Eve to the flood. And so, yes, it's going to be a little more difficult taking your family's heritage. So my last name is Bewley, And if I wanted to figure out how many years the Bewleys have walked the earth, I would do the same thing. I would sit down and figure out how many years apart am I from my father. My father was the firstborn. I'm the first and only born, you know, and so I would take the age that he was when he had me, and that would be, I would write that down, but I would have to go back to when the Bewleys first started, and I would have to write down the age of the very first Bewley that ever existed, male, and I would have to figure out how old he was when he had his first child, his first son, his firstborn son. And I would have to write, so let's say that was 39 years apart, I would write down 39 on a piece of paper. Then I would have to take his son, figure out how old he was before he gave birth to him, or not him, the wife, obviously, the wife, before his wife gave birth to his first uh, child, or not son, firstborn son. And then I would have to continue that process. And I would write each of those down on paper. Then I would add all of those up, and that's going to tell you how old the Bewley family is. Now, I have not done that, but that's going to tell you how old the Bewley family is. So you can do that same thing for any family. Especially, it would be a little more difficult, I believe, but you can also do it for a nation. See, the or for the white man, let's say you want to know how long, you know, Caucasian people have walked the earth. Well, you would it would be a more difficult process, but you could do the same thing. Is you can take the very first Caucasian person that you would identify as Caucasian, and you would take the, kind of the age that they were when they had their firstborn child. Um, Obviously, it can get a little more complicated because you also um, have to remember, that you have different cultures coming in and moving one culture out. Not only do you have one culture that comes in, moves a culture out, you have a history of that kind of repeating. So you have that, but you have different cultures intermarrying. So that can be a little more difficult to kind of, but it's pretty much the same concept, pretty much. Again, there's other things that I believe that you would have to consider, right? One, culture coming in, moving that one out, and you also have the intermarrying with, like, for example, you do have, like, if a child that was Caucasian got married to somebody that was African, their offspring is going to be a mix, and therefore, like, the skin tone is going to be, so that can be a little more complicated. But I do believe that that is one of the processes um, of figuring out just how long the African people have been in Africa, for example, or how long the Caucasian people have been in Europe, for example. Again, taking some of the other things that I mentioned into account can complicate that process. But if we want to know how old this world is, that without any historical document, you can take the age of the firstborn male, of how old his father was when they had the firstborn, write that down until you get to where you are today, add all of that up. That's going to tell you how old the world is.